This week I made a song where everything except the lead vocal came in some way, shape, or form from this clip.
絶え進む人の群れは誰も無口で耳鳴りばかり聞いている私も一人連絡 That's the Japanese country music.
This was taken from a live stream that the band Bent Knee was doing during their Shiny Eyed Babies remix contest. And I took on this particular challenge in part because I wanted to try using a less than ideal sample. I'm really not very experienced in the world of flipping samples in this way, so that was new to me. Also, it's just kind of a shit post because I made a joke about doing exactly this in the actual live chat, so it seemed like something I should follow up with, if only for my own amusement. But anyway, here's what resulted. I smoke 3 packs a day to learn what all the warnings mean. I flake the ashes into piles of cash I got for every mile that I walked barefooted. Shoes lost kicking strangers' asses hard enough to split the soul, and now it's coming back together. And I'm melting, and I'm gone. All my reasons to be was so wrong. All my brain cells, everyone. All on air from your lungs past your tongue. Oh, I burned my old house down, but it's okay, 'cause I found refuge in this old 45. The crack that warms my bones aching from miles that I crawled bare-legged. Dirty clothes and scattered soul, all for nothing, so I thought. But now it's sonic pilgrimage, and I still smoke 2 packs a day because I like the taste of smoke. And I still burn my cash, but now I burn it on things I enjoy. I still have no shoes, but now I dance into the sunset. Wicked strangers watching as I glide further towards your back room bar. And I'm melting, and I'm gone. All my reasons to be was so wrong. All my brain cells, everyone. All on air from your lips past your tongue. And I'm happy when it comes in my teeth goes slow. Yours got every child. Being up and twisted and foul. So I got kind of mixed feelings about how this works out, but I do feel like it's got a lot of character, and it created a lot of interesting textures, and you definitely get pulled along for the ride. I think when you're working with a sample like this that doesn't necessarily have as much as you'd want in it. Now, admittedly, I'm very unfamiliar with this kind of work. I'm sure like somebody like, I don't know, Andrew Huang could like take this and totally bring it to another level, but I'm sadly not Andrew Huang, so here we are. The star of the show was granular synthesis, and I'm just using a really simple tool. I think it's called Texture Synth. It's just a free one that I got that, to be honest, I like, it's not even like a an audio company that put it out. I think it was the final project for a grad student in a music technology program or something like that. Anyway, it's functional. Basically, all of the melodic parts were from the granular synth, with the only exception being the this thing in the chorus that was a vocal sample that I pulled out and did some processing too. But the granular synth, I used it for a lot. Now, if you make the grains small enough, it kind of, it's not that crazy. It's pretty close to a sine wave, but it's got its own character, its own rough edges, and so it kind of creates an interesting vibe. It's sort of limited in some ways too. I had to screw with it a lot to get like stable, distinctive pitches. That was actually kind of a challenge of using it. Maybe that's just because I don't know what I'm doing with with granular synthesis well enough, or maybe it's just a temperamental thing, or maybe the sample that I was using just wasn't ideal for that kind of sound. I don't know. I managed to figure it out to a decent enough degree that I could get it to work, so, you know. But there was some other stuff that wasn't melodic that was that as well, like for instance the all the weird sounds that come in immediately after the first chorus. That was the granular synth, me basically playing around with the settings in real time and just creating this huge weird cluster of random sounds from the whole length of the sample, basically. Drum parts, including the hi-hat, were all different. Those were actually basically just little tiny clips that I took and then did a whole bunch of processing to. The hi-hat was basically, I took a sample, loaded into a sampler, and then pitched it up like crazy and played. It's actually like a note that Courtney's singing, and I'm just playing like a really gross cluster chord in a really high register, and so in context it doesn't sound harmonically distinct. The bonk 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 thing that opens up the track is basically the same sample that I took to create the kick that comes in the chorus. I put a bit crusher on it and I put it into a sampler so I could vary the pitch, and then I basically just hit random notes, and then I did that again in the other ear. Basically I hard panned the 2 takes, and that's how I created that. And really that was kind of the thing that sort of got the wheels on this really turning in a real way. I developed some of the sounds before and played with them, but wasn't that inspired. And then I got that going, and I liked it and kind of decided to dig into that further. There are a couple little dirty tricks I used, like in lieu of a crash, I used really reverberated, rapidly fading out random vocal samples and stuff, or sometimes literally the reverb on my voice I just jack up for a second to kind of give that impact impression. It doesn't sound like a crash, but it has like a vaguely similar effect. There were a lot of things about how this one turned out that I didn't like. Like the overall sound is kind of wimpy and cluttered in my mind. A bit of that might just be my mixing. A bit of it is that I'm drawing entirely from a pool that, I mean, it's a friggin' Zoom call, so it's low quality. There's a lot of audio detail missing, and every single thing in the song is coming from that same source, so it's natural that there's, like, I guess, a limit to what you can do with that. But again, I don't know, but somebody who's better at this kind of work could do a more transformative job than I could. It's totally possible, but I found it challenging, and I guess a lot of what I found myself doing was trying to kind of eventually giving up and leaning into the weirdness and the wimpiness of it rather than trying to fight it. And that's kind of, I think, how this track ended up so quirky and weird, is because I just realized that it was like, either do that or sound like you're trying and failing miserably to create like a pop production, which obviously wasn't going to work. There was also an interesting puzzle where my vocals, and by which I really mean like the line that I was singing and the lyrics and my vocal delivery, even more so than the audio side of it, writing those was really almost a puzzle to try to be like, okay, I've got these ideas that are all kind of cool and kind of coherent, but pretty out of whack, and like maybe I'm not in love with them. So how do I create a vocal line that turns all of those into something that I like? And I think I succeeded. I mean, I like it. It's not perfect. There's definitely a lot I could change or polish up about it, but I like the place it ended up, and certainly feel like it's got a lot of potential as an idea, and there's some cool moments. One thing that I would change in retrospect that really has nothing to do with the actual challenge premise is the fact that there's way too much room sound in the vocal. Those of you who are a bit audio savvy may notice that I'm recording these things in a totally unideal environment with really no acoustic treatment whatsoever. I didn't find that was really much of a super noticeable problem in the first 2 challenges. I don't know if it's just because like wetter vocals or what. I think a bit of it was I just lucked out with where I had the mic in the room, that it was like a little bit less obvious. But this time I found like there are points where the the vocal line is completely dry as far as like software reverb, but you can hear the room in it a lot. It's got kind of an interesting timbre, but it's definitely not really what I was going for, so it's kind of like a regret. And honestly, overall, in general, like this whole process was a bit frustrating because I found I was really fighting the sample. But I think that's maybe a bit of the charm of this process too, is that you're kind of like, you're in a battle with the source material you're working with, and you're not going to win, but you're going to get some victories. And I guess maybe the hope is that in meeting the sample in the middle, you'll end up with a final result that, while it's maybe not exactly what you had in mind, you can still be happy with it. And that's how you kind of end up in something that's different, in something that could never have been created. And I guess it's sort of obvious to some degree that that kind of uniqueness is sort of what you're after with an exercise like this, because I mean, reductive synthesis and traditional instrumentation has been done plenty, and it's quite a challenge, nigh on impossible really, to create something that's truly never been heard before, at least texturally. Whereas when you're using a sample that you know for a fact no one has ever done anything with before, well, obviously you're going to end up with colors that haven't been treaded upon. So it's not always necessarily the easiest thing to work with, and I don't know that I'd wholeheartedly recommend using just one and restricting yourself to that solely as something to put out a final polished product with. But as an inspirational tool and a sound design tool, it's definitely cool, and I could easily see integrating some of these techniques into other compositions. So yeah, fun times. And I like the song that resulted out of it. I think it goes a bit, it's funny, simultaneously with and against my writing tendencies. Like the melody and the chord structure and all that is very much a kind of thing that I would normally write, but there's a certain like explosive rocky energy I tend to go for that I couldn't really, or at least I didn't know how to with the tools I had, which made me force me into like a bit of a different aesthetic. And I think that that's something kind of special. I think one theme I'm noticing with these challenges as I'm doing them is that almost all of them, one of the valuable things is that by limiting yourself in ways you normally wouldn't, you force yourself to make decisions you normally wouldn't make. And that often reveals interesting facets of your creativity that you didn't know were there. So, yeah, cool. Check out Bentley, by the way. They're really good. Bye.